The morning sun rose slowly over Arlington Cemetery, casting a soft golden light on the rows of white headstones. The world around seemed peaceful, silent, and still, but inside that peace something unusual was about to happen, something no one could have imagined. For the guard on duty that day, Sergeant Daniel Moore, it was supposed to be another calm morning at the tomb of the unknown soldier. Daniel was a man of honor, known for his discipline and focus. Every step he took was precise, every movement sharp. He had served there for almost 4 years, and not once had he allowed his concentration to break. As Daniel began his patrol, the crisp sound of his boots echoed softly against the marble walkway. Tourists stood quietly behind the barriers, watching in admiration. To them, he looked like a symbol of respect and perfection, a man guarding the resting place of heroes. But far away from that quiet pride, a man named Jason Cole was walking toward the cemetery gates with a troubled heart and a plan that would change both their lives forever. Jason had been on the run for months. His name had been in the news, though never for something terrible, rather for a string of bad choices that had pushed him into a corner. He wasn't dangerous by nature, but he was desperate. He had once been a soldier too, long ago, but life after the army hadn't treated him kindly. The jobs disappeared, friends faded away, and soon he found himself living in his car, afraid of what was coming next. He had come to Arlington that morning not out of hatred, but confusion. He said to himself quietly as he walked through the gate, "I just need someone to listen. Someone who'll understand." His jacket was worn out, his shoes dusty, and his eyes filled with exhaustion. The guard at the entrance checked his ID but didn't recognize his name. Jason smiled politely, said he wanted to visit a friend's grave, and walked through without trouble. Every step he took closer to the tomb made his heart beat faster. As he reached the quiet path leading to the tomb, he noticed the guard's precise steps, back and forth, silent, controlled. Tourists were taking pictures, and the air was filled with a mix of respect and quiet awe. Jason stood behind the barrier, staring at Daniel. Something about the soldier's calmness reminded him of his past, the discipline, the structure, the pride he once felt wearing a uniform. For a few minutes he just stood there, lost in memories. But as the crowd began to thin, his thoughts grew louder. He was tired of running. He wanted someone to see him, not as a criminal, not as a failure, but as a human being who had lost his way. Daniel noticed him lingering, watching longer than most. He didn't react immediately, but his training told him to stay alert. After another minute, Daniel's eyes met Jason's, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. One man guarding the peace, the other carrying chaos inside. Jason took a step forward, crossing the line he wasn't supposed to. Daniel's voice, calm but firm, broke the silence. "Sir, please step back behind the barrier." Jason froze. Everyone around turned their heads. The calm atmosphere shifted slightly, a quiet tension filling the air. Jason raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. "I just need to talk," he said softly. Daniel's training kicked in. He didn't move from his position. "Sir, please step back now." But Jason's voice trembled. "You don't understand. I served too. I was one of you once." Those words made Daniel hesitate for half a second. He had heard many visitors say emotional things before, but something in Jason's tone was different. Fragile, desperate. Daniel glanced at the small crowd watching and then looked back at Jason. "We can talk, but please move back first." Jason nodded, but instead of stepping back, his hand reached inside his jacket. A gasp came from the crowd. Daniel tensed immediately, eyes fixed on Jason's movements. Jason pulled out a small black object, not aiming it, just holding it in trembling hands. The air went still. Tourists froze where they stood. Some took a few steps back. Others whispered in fear. But Daniel didn't panic. He kept his composure, eyes locked on Jason. "Sir, put that down. No one needs to get hurt," he said calmly, his voice even. Jason's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't come here to hurt anyone," he said shakily. I don't know what else to do. They're after me. Everyone thinks I'm dangerous, but I'm not. I swear I'm not." Daniel slowly took a single step forward, his tone still soft but steady. "Then let me help you. You can't fix anything like this. Just put it down and we can talk." Jason looked around and at the crowd, at the sacred tomb, at the peaceful sky above. He seemed lost between his guilt and his memories. "I used to stand like you," he whispered. Back straight, eyes forward. "But when I came home, everything fell apart." Daniel's expression softened, but he didn't move any closer. He knew that one wrong step could change everything. "You served your country," he said quietly. "That still matters. But right now, you need to let go of whatever's in your hand." Jason's grip tightened. His mind was spinning, not with anger, but with pain. The weight of his mistakes pressed down on him like the whole world was against him. The tourist didn't know his story. The news didn't tell the full truth. But in that silent moment facing the tomb of those who never came home, Jason felt the burden of every bad choice he had made. Daniel slowly raised his hand, palm open, a gesture of peace. "Listen to me," he said. "You're not alone. You think no one will understand, but that's not true. You made mistakes, sure. Everyone has. But this isn't how your story has to end." Jason's eyes flickered with confusion. His hand trembled. "You don't even know me," he muttered. Daniel nodded. "Maybe not. But I've stood where you are, feeling lost, not knowing what's next. The difference is I had someone to stop me from giving up. Let me be that person for you now." The crowd stood silently. Even the wind seemed to pause. A single bird flew across the sky, and its shadow passed between them like a quiet reminder of how fragile life could be. Jason took a deep breath. His hands began to shake even more. "You really think it's not too late?" he asked quietly. Daniel nodded slowly. "It's never too late to start again, but you have to make the choice now. Not tomorrow. Not later. Right now." The tension in Jason's shoulders seemed to ease just a little. His eyes darted between Daniel and the tomb. Memories of his friends from service flashed through his mind. Faces of people who had believed in him once. People who would never have wanted this. A single tear rolled down his cheek. He lowered his hand a little, breathing heavily. The crowd stayed silent, holding their breath. Daniel stayed still, afraid that any sudden move could break the fragile calm that had filled the space between them. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. It was just two soldiers, one still in uniform, one broken by the past, facing each other across a line of honor and regret. Then Jason slowly, very slowly took another deep breath and whispered, "Okay." Daniel's eyes stayed locked on him as Jason carefully bent down, setting the object on the ground. It wasn't a weapon after all. It was an old metal lighter, scratched and worn, engraved with the name of his fallen friend. The crowd exhaled in relief. Jason covered his face with his hands, shaking quietly. Daniel gave a brief signal, and two nearby officers approached calmly, not rushing, not shouting. They guided Jason aside gently while Daniel remained standing, watching the man's trembling figure disappear behind the line of trees. The ceremony resumed later, but for everyone who witnessed it, that morning stayed in their minds forever. A moment that began in fear had turned into something no one expected. A quiet reminder that sometimes, even at the edge of despair, understanding can change everything. And for Daniel Moore, the guard who never broke his discipline, that day would mark the beginning of a story that would soon shock everyone, because what came next was even more unexpected. After that tense morning, the silence around the tomb felt heavier than ever. The crowd had left, whispering about what they had just seen. Some still looked shaken, others amazed at how calmly the guard had handled the situation. But for Sergeant Daniel Moore, the moment kept replaying in his mind over and over again. He returned to his station later that day, his posture as straight as ever, his steps as precise as before. To the tourist watching, nothing seemed different. But inside, his thoughts wouldn't settle. The image of the trembling man, Jason Cole, haunted him. The man's broken voice, his sad eyes, and that small engraved lighter had left something deep in Daniel's heart. After the ceremony ended, Daniel was called into the small guard office behind the memorial grounds. Captain Reynolds, his commanding officer, was already there. "You handled it well, Moore," the captain said seriously, "but we'll need to file a report." The man was taken into custody by local police. "They said he'll be questioned." Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." Reynolds studied his face. "You seem troubled. Something bothering you?" Daniel hesitated. "He wasn't dangerous, sir. He was just lost. You could see it in his eyes." The captain sighed. "Maybe so. But you did your duty. You kept everyone safe, and that's what matters." But as Daniel walked back to his quarters, his heart felt heavy. He couldn't shake the feeling that Jason needed help, not punishment. Something about the man's words, "I used to stand like you," echoed in his mind like a quiet cry for understanding. Later that evening, Daniel sat by his small desk, staring at a photo of his old unit from years ago. He remembered one of his closest friends, Leo, who had returned home from service and struggled to adjust to normal life. Leo had called him once asking for help, but Daniel had been away on duty and never called back. A few months later, Leo had passed away in his sleep, worn out by loneliness and pain. That memory had never fully left Daniel. And now, seeing Jason, it felt like history was trying to remind him of something he had ignored before, that sometimes the hardest battles happen after the war ends. The next morning, Daniel couldn't resist. He called the local precinct where Jason was being held. The officer on the line confirmed that Jason Cole had been detained overnight. "He's calm now," the officer said. "He told us he just wanted someone to talk to." Daniel paused for a moment before asking, "Is it possible for me to speak with him?" There was silence on the line. Then the officer said, "That's unusual, Sergeant, but I can ask." 2 hours later, Daniel found himself walking down a quiet hallway at the precinct. He wasn't in uniform, just a simple shirt and jeans. When he entered the small interview room, Jason was sitting at the table looking tired but calm. His eyes widened when he saw Daniel. "You," Jason said quietly. "You're the guard from the tomb." Daniel nodded and sat down across from him. "Yeah, I wanted to check if you're okay." Jason gave a small, bitter laugh. "Okay? That's a strange word for me now." Daniel leaned forward slightly. "You scared a lot of people out there, but I could tell you didn't mean harm. What were you trying to do, Jason?" Jason looked down at his hands. His fingers traced the scratches on the table. "I didn't have a plan," he admitted. "I just wanted someone to see me, to remember I existed. I went to the tomb because that place meant something to me once. I served with the 82nd Infantry, lost my best friend overseas. When I came back, everything felt different. People moved on, jobs disappeared, and I just..." He stopped and sighed. "I lost myself." Daniel listened quietly, his face thoughtful. "And the lighter?" he asked. Jason looked up, eyes wet. "It belonged to him, my friend. He used to say, 'Keep this and don't forget who you are.' But somewhere along the way I did forget." For a few seconds there was silence. Then Daniel spoke softly. "You know, you reminded me of someone I once knew. He was my friend too. Came home and struggled to live a normal life again. I didn't help him when I should have." Jason frowned. "Did something happen to him?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Yeah, he didn't make it. And I've carried that regret ever since." The two men sat quietly, the weight of shared pain filling the space between them. Then Jason said softly, "You came here. You didn't have to. Why?" Daniel's answer was simple. "Because I saw someone who needed to be heard. I couldn't just walk away again." Jason looked at him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. For the first time in years, he felt like someone actually cared. Over the next few days, Daniel visited again, talking to the officers and explaining Jason's background. He told them Jason was a veteran who had lost his way, not a criminal. The police, moved by the situation, decided not to press serious charges. Instead, they recommended Jason to a local veterans support center. When Daniel visited him the day he was released, Jason was quiet but grateful. "I don't know what to say," he murmured. "Don't say anything," Daniel replied gently. "Just promise me one thing, that you'll try again. Start fresh. There are people who can help." Jason nodded. "I'll try." They walked out of the building together, the afternoon sun warming the cold pavement. For a moment it felt like the world had slowed down. Jason looked at Daniel and said, "You really believe people like me can change?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I believe anyone can change. You just need someone to believe in you first." Jason took a deep breath. For the first time in a long while he felt hope, fragile but real. Over the next few weeks, Jason joined a small veterans program. He attended meetings, talked with counselors, and started volunteering at a local shelter. Each day was hard, but he kept going. The people around him didn't see a fugitive anymore. They saw a man trying to make things right. Meanwhile, Daniel returned to his post at the tomb. Every time he marched in silence, he thought about Jason, the man who had once stood on the other side of the barrier, lost and scared, and who now was learning to rebuild his life. One afternoon, Daniel received a small letter at the guard station. It had no return address, just his name written neatly. Inside was a short note. "Sergeant Moore, I wanted to thank you. You could have treated me like a criminal, but instead you saw me as a person. I'm working now at a shelter helping other veterans. Every day is tough, but I keep going. You were right. It's never too late to start again. Jason Cole." Daniel read the note twice, his throat tightening. He folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. For the rest of the day, his steps felt lighter, his mind calmer. But little did either of them know the story wasn't over. A local reporter had been at the cemetery that day and had captured a photo of the moment Jason lowered the lighter. The image showed two men, one in uniform, one in pain, facing each other in perfect stillness. It soon began spreading online. People called it the moment of grace. Messages poured in from around the country. Veterans shared their own struggles. Families thanked Daniel for showing compassion. The story touched thousands, proving that even in the most unexpected places, kindness could change a life. But fame also brought attention, and not all of it was simple. Some questioned whether Daniel had broken protocol by talking to Jason later. Others praised him as a hero. The military began an internal review, and Daniel soon found himself caught between recognition and criticism. Yet through it all, he remained calm. When reporters asked him why he did it, his answer was the same. Because sometimes, doing the right thing means breaking silence, not rules. And while the world debated, both men continued their quiet journeys. One standing guard over heroes, the other learning to live like one again. But what neither of them knew was that fate had another twist waiting, one that would bring them face to face again in a way that no one could have predicted. Weeks passed quietly after the news story spread. For Sergeant Daniel Moore, life seemed to return to its usual rhythm. Each morning he stood tall at the tomb of the unknown soldier, performing his duty with the same calm grace that had always defined him. But beneath that composed surface, his life had quietly changed. Every time he took his steps across the marble, he thought about the message in Jason's letter. "It's never too late to start again." Those words had stayed with him, giving him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Yet deep inside, he couldn't shake the thought that the story between him and Jason wasn't fully over. One afternoon, while Daniel was finishing his shift, Captain Reynolds called him to the office. The captain's expression was serious but not harsh. "Moore," he said, "you've received quite a bit of attention lately. That photo from the cemetery has gone viral. You've been invited to speak at a veterans charity event next month." Daniel blinked in surprise. "Me, sir? I'm not exactly a speaker." Reynolds smiled faintly. "You're not being asked to give a speech about rules or ceremony. They want you to talk about compassion, what happened that day. It's made an impact and people want to hear from you." Daniel hesitated, feeling uncertain. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what I thought was right." "That's exactly why they want you," the captain said. "Think about it." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk again, staring at Jason's letter. The idea of standing before a crowd made him nervous. He wasn't used to attention. His job was built on silence and precision, not applause. But something in him whispered that maybe this was another chance to make a difference. At the same time, somewhere across town, Jason Cole was working late at the veterans shelter. He was sweeping the floor after helping serve dinner. The place was small, but it felt like home now. There was laughter, shared stories, and quiet understanding between the people there. Men and women who all carried invisible scars from their pasts. Jason had been attending group meetings and even helping others fill out job applications. It wasn't easy. Every day brought its own struggles, but for once he felt like his life had purpose again. Sometimes he would look at the small metal lighter on his desk and smile sadly. It reminded him of how far he had come and how one act of kindness had changed everything. One evening, the shelter director walked up to him holding a piece of paper. "Hey, Jason," she said warmly. "Have you seen this?" "You might want to." She handed him a flyer. It showed a picture of Sergeant Daniel Moore in uniform and the title, "Veterans Charity Night, Healing Through Honor." Jason froze as he read it. Daniel was going to speak publicly for the first time. The date was only 2 weeks away. For a long moment, Jason just stood there, unsure how to feel. The man who had once faced him across That silent tomb, the man who had believed in him when no one else did, was now becoming a voice of hope for others. He folded the flyer carefully and slipped it into his pocket. That night he couldn't sleep either. He kept thinking about what he would say to Daniel if they met again. Would Daniel even remember him? Would he be proud or disappointed that he hadn't done enough with the second chance he was given? 2 weeks later, the charity event arrived. It was held in a large hall decorated with flags and photos of veterans. Rows of chairs filled the room and people from all walks of life came: soldiers, families, reporters, and community members. The air was filled with quiet respect and curiosity. Daniel arrived early wearing his uniform. He looked sharp, but his heart beat fast. Captain Reynolds had helped him prepare a short speech, but Daniel had decided to speak from the heart instead. As the event began, a few speakers went up first, veterans who shared their personal journeys of struggle and recovery. Some spoke of loss, others of finding hope again. Daniel listened quietly, his hands folded, his thoughts deep. Then it was his turn. He walked up to the stage, the lights shining gently on him. The room went silent. He began softly, "I'm not used to speaking in front of people. My job usually requires silence, a silence that honors those who can no longer speak for themselves." A few people nodded. He continued, "A few months ago, something happened while I was on duty. A man approached the tomb, a man in pain, a man who had lost his way. He wasn't there to hurt anyone. He was there because he needed to be seen, to be understood." Daniel paused, his eyes scanning the crowd. I saw in him what I had seen in many others, someone carrying a burden too heavy to hold alone. That day I learned that sometimes our duty is not just to guard history but to protect humanity, even in the smallest moments. The audience listened intently. Some wiped away quiet tears. Daniel took a breath. That man reminded me that it's never too late to stand tall again. Compassion can do what commands can't. It can heal. And I'll always believe that one act of understanding can save a life. As he stepped away from the microphone, the hall erupted in gentle applause. It wasn't loud or wild, it was heartfelt. Daniel gave a humble nod and returned to his seat. But in the back of the hall, near the doorway, a man stood quietly, his eyes shining with emotion. It was Jason. He had come after all. He didn't want to interrupt or draw attention, but he couldn't stay away. Hearing Daniel's words made his chest tighten with gratitude and pride. When the event ended, people began leaving, shaking hands, and thanking Daniel for his message. Jason waited patiently near the exit, unsure if he should approach. Finally, when the crowd thinned out, Daniel turned and saw him. For a brief second, both men froze, disbelief flashing across their faces. Then Daniel smiled warmly. "Jason?" Jason nodded, his voice low. "I didn't want to bother you. I just wanted to hear you speak." Daniel stepped closer. "I'm glad you came. You look better." Jason chuckled softly. "Better than the last time you saw me, that's for sure." They both laughed quietly, a small but genuine sound. Daniel asked, "How have you been?" Jason replied, "Trying to live right. Working at a shelter now. Helping other vets who went through what I did. It's not much, but it's something." Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's more than something. It's everything. You're doing good work." Jason's eyes glistened. "I owe it to you. If it weren't for that day, I don't know where I'd be." Daniel shook his head gently. "No, Jason, you did that yourself. I just reminded you what was still inside you." They stood there for a moment in silence, two men connected by a single act of faith. Around them, people were talking, laughing and moving, but for them, the world felt still again, just like that day at the tomb. Jason looked at Daniel and said softly, "You know, people call you a hero now." Daniel smiled modestly. "Heroes are the ones who never give up, like you." Jason looked down, smiling faintly. "Maybe, but I think we both learned something that day." Daniel nodded. "Yes, sometimes the people we think we're saving end up saving us too." As they left the hall together, the cool night air brushed against their faces. The stars above seemed brighter than usual, as if the sky itself approved of this small miracle of redemption. Neither man spoke much on the way out, but both carried a quiet understanding, a peace that words couldn't describe. And as Jason walked away down the street, the flyer from the event still in his pocket, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, hope not just for himself, but for the world around him. Little did either of them know, though. The story that had brought them together would soon draw national attention once more, this time in a way that would challenge their courage, test their friendship, and surprise everyone watching. Months had passed since the charity event. Daniel Moore returned to his daily duties at the tomb of the unknown soldier, his steps measured, his gaze steady. To the outside world, everything seemed as it had always been. The tourists continued to admire the silent, precise movements of the guard, the serene rows of white headstones, and the quiet dignity of the memorial. But Daniel knew that beneath that calm exterior, his life had quietly changed. Jason Cole, on the other hand, had found a rhythm to his days. The veterans' shelter had become his second home. He had grown close to several of the men and women there, hearing their stories, sharing his own, and helping wherever he could. The weight of the past was still there, but it no longer felt unbearable. Jason was learning that small, consistent steps toward goodness could create change. Not overnight, but gradually, steadily. One crisp autumn morning, Daniel was finishing his early patrol when his phone rang. It was a local news reporter who had once covered the viral story of the tomb incident. "Sergeant Moore," the reporter said, "we've received a tip about Jason Cole. It seems he's helped prevent a difficult situation at the shelter today. We'd like to cover it, a follow-up story." Daniel paused. He knew the world loved dramatic headlines, but Jason had worked quietly, without expectation of recognition. "He's doing good work," Daniel said simply. "But please don't make it about him like some hero story. He's just trying to live right." The reporter promised to be respectful, but Daniel's unease remained. He knew that once Jason's story spread further, attention would follow, and sometimes attention could be a burden. Meanwhile, Jason was teaching a small group of young veterans how to fill out job applications. Many of them struggled, unsure of where to start after leaving the service. Jason guided them patiently, showing them the importance of detail, honesty, and persistence. He had learned these lessons himself over the past months and wanted to pass them on. Later, as he stacked chairs in the empty shelter, he noticed a man lingering near the door. It was someone unfamiliar, dressed in casual clothes, looking hesitant. Jason approached carefully.
"Can I help you?"
he asked. The man shifted nervously. "Are you Jason Cole?" Jason nodded. "Yes, who's asking?" "My name's Mark," the man said. "I saw your story online. You helped my brother a few weeks ago. He was struggling after coming back from service. You showed him a way forward. I wanted to thank you personally." Jason's chest tightened. The small acts of kindness he thought were unnoticed were making a real difference. "I'm glad he's doing better," Jason said quietly. Mark smiled faintly. "We all are, and I wanted you to know something. There are more people like me who've heard your story and Daniel Moore's story. They're inspired to help too." Jason felt a swell of emotion. He looked down at his worn-out shoes, the small engraved lighter sitting on his desk, and realized that the ripple he and Daniel had started was spreading further than he had imagined. That evening, Daniel received another phone call, this time from Jason himself. "Sergeant Moore," he said, "I just wanted to let you know. Things are getting better. The shelter is busier than ever, and I'm finally feeling like I belong." Daniel smiled, though Jason couldn't see it. "I'm proud of you, Jason. That's exactly what you needed to hear from yourself, not from anyone else." Jason laughed softly. "Yeah, maybe, but hearing it from you doesn't hurt either." They talked for a while longer, sharing small stories about their lives since the incident. The conversation was simple, quiet, and heartfelt. A reminder of the bond they had formed, not through fame or drama, but through empathy and understanding. A few days later, a small ceremony was held at the shelter to honor local volunteers. Jason had been asked to give a short speech. When he spoke, he told the audience about the importance of supporting one another, especially after leaving service. He didn't mention the incident at the tomb directly, only speaking of how he had learned to rebuild his life with the help of others. Daniel, invited as a guest, watched silently from the back. He felt a mix of pride and humility. Seeing Jason speak confidently, helping others, reminded him why compassion mattered, why small, thoughtful actions could shift lives in profound ways. After the ceremony, Daniel and Jason walked outside together. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the pavement. "You've come a long way," Daniel said, his voice soft but firm. Jason nodded. I have. And it wouldn't have been possible without that day at the tomb. You gave me a second chance when no one else would. Daniel shook his head. You earned it yourself, Jason. I only reminded you of what was already inside. They walked in silence for a few moments, letting the crisp evening air fill the quiet space between them. Then Jason said thoughtfully, Do you ever worry, though? That one wrong step could ruin everything? Daniel considered this. Every day. But that's life. You can't control every outcome. You can only choose how you respond, and you can only try to do the right thing. Jason nodded, taking in the words. For the first time, he realized that life wasn't about avoiding mistakes entirely, but about learning from them and moving forward. Weeks passed, and Jason's story slowly gained national attention again. News outlets began covering the impact of the veterans' shelter, showing how someone who had been lost and scared could rebuild their life and help others along the way. Daniel, meanwhile, continued his work at Arlington Cemetery, but now his perspective had changed subtly. Every step, every precise movement, carried the quiet understanding that his role was about more than just guarding history. It was about influencing the present, shaping lives in small yet meaningful ways. One afternoon, as Daniel walked his usual patrol, he noticed a young man lingering near the tomb. The man looked nervous, unsure of how to behave. Daniel's heart recognized the same uncertainty he had once seen in Jason. He approached calmly. Good afternoon, he said. Is this your first time here? The young man nodded. Yes, sir, I just wanted to pay respects. I didn't know how to act. Daniel smiled gently. You're here, and that's what matters. Step by step, you'll learn. Everyone does. As Daniel continued his patrol, he felt a quiet satisfaction. His actions, small as they seemed, had a ripple effect. One day, someone lost and uncertain would find guidance, hope, and understanding, just like Jason had. That evening, Jason received a message from a former co-worker at the shelter.
Hey, Jason, just wanted to say,
You're inspiring more people than you realize. Keep it up. Jason smiled, placing the phone down. He thought of Daniel, of the tomb, and of the long journey that had started with fear, hesitation, and uncertainty. He realized that life could be unpredictable, but that human kindness, and even in a single moment, and it could change everything. As the sun set over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, both men reflected quietly on how far they had come. Daniel in his role as the silent guardian, Jason in his journey toward redemption, their lives intertwined, not by chance, but by the shared experience of empathy, courage, and understanding. Yet even as the night settled, there was an unspoken feeling that their story wasn't finished. Life had a way of surprising people, often when they least expected it. And though both men had faced fear, uncertainty, and past mistakes, they knew deep down that the next chapter, full of challenges, lessons, and moments of grace, was still ahead. For Daniel, it was a reminder that every decision, every choice to act with compassion, could leave a lasting impact. For Jason, it was proof that even when life seemed lost, hope could be reclaimed and purpose rediscovered. And as the first stars appeared in the quiet night sky, the two men, separated by distance but connected in spirit, both understood one simple truth. No matter how dark the path may seem, the light of understanding, courage, and kindness could always guide the way. The crisp morning air carried a sense of promise as Sergeant Daniel Moore walked the familiar path around the tomb of the unknown soldier. The sun had just begun to rise, spilling golden light across the rows of white headstones. Each step he took echoed lightly, precise as always, but today, there was something different in his heart, a quiet anticipation. Word had spread that Jason Cole would be visiting Arlington Cemetery for the first time since that unforgettable morning months ago. Daniel's heart carried both pride and a tinge of worry. He knew Jason had come a long way, but he also knew that facing the place where their lives had intersected could be emotionally overwhelming. Meanwhile, Jason prepared for the visit with a mixture of nervousness and resolve. He dressed carefully, choosing a simple shirt and clean jacket. As he looked in the mirror, he noticed the slight tremor in his hands, a reminder that the scars of the past were still present. But he also saw a spark in his eyes, a spark of hope and determination that had grown stronger each day. When Jason arrived at the cemetery, Daniel spotted him immediately. The man who had once approached the tomb in fear and uncertainty now walked with quiet confidence, Yet Daniel could see the lingering tension in his shoulders. This wasn't just a visit. It was a test of how far Jason had truly come. They greeted each other with a firm handshake and a nod. Words weren't needed at first. Both men understood the weight of that shared history, the unspoken lessons learned in silence and action. As they walked slowly along the marble pathway, Daniel spoke first. "It's been a long journey, Jason." Jason nodded. "Yeah, longer than I expected. But I'm glad I kept going." They paused in front of the tomb. The air was filled with the quiet respect that had always defined the place. Tourists and visitors moved around them, but neither Daniel nor Jason noticed. They were focused entirely on the moment. Jason reached into his pocket and pulled out the small engraved lighter that had once belonged to his fallen friend. He held it carefully, almost reverently. "This was the reason I came here today," he said softly. "To remember why I had to change, and to thank you." Daniel's eyes softened. "You didn't need me to change, Jason. You found the strength yourself. I only reminded you what you already had." Jason smiled faintly. "Still, I wouldn't be here without that moment. Without you believing in me when no one else would." They stood in silence, letting the weight of the words sink in. Daniel looked out over the rows of headstones and then back at Jason. "You've done well," he said quietly. "Helping others, working at the shelter. That shows real courage." Jason's lips curved into a small smile. "I've learned that courage isn't always about facing danger. Sometimes it's about facing yourself, your mistakes, and your fears. Every day I try to do that." Daniel nodded thoughtfully. "That's the hardest kind of courage. The kind that doesn't make the headlines but changes lives anyway." For a long moment, they simply looked at the tomb together, sharing the quiet strength that had drawn them back here. And then Jason spoke again, softer this time. I finally understand what it means to honor someone. It's not just about remembering the past. It's about how you live now, how you help others, how you make a difference." Daniel smiled. "Exactly. And you've already started doing that." The two men began walking again, this time toward a small memorial garden nearby. Jason noticed that Daniel's attention to detail, the careful steps, the disciplined posture, still carried the same calm authority as always. Yet Daniel seemed lighter somehow, as if the knowledge that Jason had turned his life around had lifted a weight from him. Jason spoke quietly, almost to himself. "I never thought I'd see this place again without fear. Without feeling lost." Daniel glanced at him. "Fear is natural. But you've learned to carry it differently now. It doesn't control you anymore." Jason nodded, feeling the truth in Daniel's words. He thought back to the moment when he first approached the tomb, trembling, uncertain, carrying the weight of months on the run. He remembered the calm authority of the guard, the patience, the quiet voice that had spoken words of understanding instead of judgment. That moment had changed everything. They arrived at a small bench overlooking the memorial garden. Jason sat first, Daniel following. Around them, flowers swayed gently in the breeze, and the soft hum of nature filled the quiet space. Jason pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. "I've been writing a bit lately," he said. "Thoughts, ideas, reminders. Things I want to remember, ways to stay on track." He handed the notebook to Daniel. "I wanted you to see it, because a lot of it started that day at the tomb. You gave me the push I needed." Daniel flipped through the pages carefully, reading phrases about hope, courage, small acts of kindness, and personal reflection. Each line reflected the transformation Jason had undergone, the careful rebuilding of a life once lost. "You've come a long way," Daniel said softly, handing the notebook back. Jason's eyes glistened. "I still have a long way to go. But now I feel like I can actually make it. I can help others like the shelter, like those veterans who have no one to guide them." Daniel nodded. "That's the real victory, Jason. It's not the headlines or recognition. It's the lives you touch and the example you set." They sat quietly, watching as the sun rose higher, spilling warm light over the garden. Tourists passed by respectfully, some noticing the two men, but most unaware of the deep story unfolding silently in the corner. After a few minutes, Daniel spoke again. "You know, Jason, people will always face challenges. Life doesn't make it easy. But you've learned something crucial, that every day is a choice. A chance to act with honor, kindness, and courage." Jason smiled faintly. "And some choices can lead to more than just survival. They can lead to purpose." Daniel nodded. "Exactly. And purpose is something worth fighting for every single day. For a moment, they both sat in quiet reflection. The past, the fear, the mistakes, the uncertainty, felt distant now, softened by the knowledge of how far they had come. The tomb behind them, a symbol of sacrifice and honor, served as a reminder that life's greatest victories often come from inner strength and compassion. Finally, Jason stood, holding the engraved lighter carefully in his hand. He looked at Daniel and said, "I think it's time to leave this place. Not because it isn't important, but because I feel ready to live fully now. I won't forget what this day represents and what this place represents, or what you've done for me." Daniel stood as well, his expression calm but filled with pride. "Go forward, Jason. Keep helping others, keep living with purpose, and remember what you've learned." They shook hands firmly, a silent agreement passing between them. Both men understood that life would continue to bring challenges, but they also knew that they had found a foundation strong enough to face anything. As Jason walked away from the tomb, the engraved lighter tucked safely in his pocket, he felt a quiet confidence he had never known before. Each step was deliberate, steady, and full of hope. He was no longer the man consumed by fear and regret. He was a man moving forward, guided by the lessons of the past and the promise of a better future. Daniel watched him disappear into the morning light, a small smile on his face. The guard returned to his position at the tomb, but he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. His duty had never been just about ceremony or precision. It had been about touching lives in moments that mattered most. That day he had seen the power of patience, empathy, and understanding. And he knew that one small act could ripple across a lifetime. Later that week, Daniel received another letter from Jason. It was brief but heartfelt. "Sergeant Moore, thank you for believing in me. I've found purpose, hope, and strength I didn't know I had. I'm helping others, staying on track, and living the life I once thought was lost. I'll never forget that morning at the tomb, and I'll never forget your kindness. Jason Cole." Daniel folded the letter carefully, placing it in his desk. The words were simple, but the impact was profound. It was a reminder that life, with all its challenges and uncertainties, could be transformed by compassion and courage. Months turned into years, and Jason continued to thrive. He became a mentor at the shelter, guiding countless veterans toward hope and opportunity. Daniel continued his duty at Arlington Cemetery, the quiet hero who had changed a life with understanding and patience. Their story became known as a tale of redemption, empathy, and courage. A man once lost found his way, guided by the quiet strength of another, proving that even in the most unexpected places, acts of kindness could change everything. And as the sun rose each day over Arlington Cemetery, Daniel and Jason carried forward the simple truth that had brought them together. No matter how dark the path, hope, courage, and compassion could always light the way.